Hello and welcome. I hope the rain isn't too much of a distraction for you. The sound of the rain, that is. Continuing with your comments and questions. How would you suggest a Westerner who is used to a more structured religion become, convert to Buddhism? As a Westerner, I feel that we are very acclimatized to religion with central texts and structures. If you want to become a Muslim, go read the Quran, a Christian, the Bible, a Jew, the Torah. You go to a mosque, church or synagogue on a set day. If you're a Christian, you can get baptized, etc. I hope you understand my point. I am unsure how or where to start with Buddhism, because there isn't one book you should read to get started or a set path to follow. Thank you. Okay, good question. It's often that is the perception of those in the West, of which I am from the West. But now living in a Buddhist country, I can see all of what you see as you describe as structured religion around what is actually beautiful philosophy and way of life as taught by the Buddha, that we can practice excuse me, wherever we are, whether we choose to be a part of organized religion or to practice separately on our own apart from that. I appreciate if you're in the West, your experience of religion is as you describe. You have the relevant texts and the places of worship. Actually, in Buddhist countries, for instance, here in Sri Lanka, very much so, Thailand, Burma, those are the Theravada Buddhist practicing countries that I am familiar with. I have been to other countries, but more familiar with those. I can speak of those, and they can be described very much similarly in that there are those places of worship, temples, Buddhist monasteries. They're usually referred to as temples here, as we refer to churches as that, mosques as that, synagogues as that you reference. And they are very much places where people do go on a set day, which is in Theravada Buddhist countries the Uposatha, the full moon, and the new moon every 15 days, which is like our Christian Sunday. In Thailand, they expand that to quarter days of the moon, so it becomes every 7 days or every quarter day. So that's the quarter moon between the full moon and new moon we call half moon. So you have two half moons, one's going and one's coming, waxing and waning moons. So they actually have a holy day, a Buddhist day in Thailand, once a week. Of course, it varies in the day of the week because it's based on the lunar calendar as opposed to the solar calendar, which from where we derive our 7 days a week. And because it's not coming from the teachings of the New Testament or the Old Testament, the Bible, let's say, whereby the day was set for no work and for worship, the Buddha taught that the lay practitioners could use these Uposatha days, which traditionally then were also used through older religions and practices as days off and times of worship, as days to be set aside for lay practitioners of Buddhism to have a more intensified form of practice. So there are those in place, albeit a little bit more difficult to see and find in the West. However, these days, with all of the online resources that we have accessible to us at our fingertips, in the palms of our hands, or I should say in the palms of your hands, at your fingertips, because I don't really need to rely on the smartphone so much myself, but it is a very useful tool for people away from a Buddhist structure to access those resources. And I appreciate where you're coming from, and that brings me on to then the beginning of your question: how would you suggest a Westerner who is used to this structured form become or convert to Buddhism? We don't really need to convert to Buddhism or become a Buddhist. It is just a matter of convention. We call practicing Buddhists as in the teacher, not a god, not a deity, not a higher power, but the teacher we call Buddha was a man, much like other teachers in other religions, Jesus, Muhammad, Moses, etc., taught us how to practice in accordance with what he discovered to be the way to become free from suffering in this very lifetime, and therefore enlightened and awakened to the reality of this existence, the truth. And he became known as the Buddha, which means awakened one, because of his exposition of that truth. And thereafter his teachings over 45 years of how we, other ordinary people, can likewise become enlightened by understanding the Four Noble Truths and following the Noble Eightfold Path. You refer to, at the end of your question, which path to follow. There's no no one book to read or set path to follow. There is in fact that. The Four Noble Truths is that there is suffering, a cause of suffering, an end of suffering, and the path leading to the end of suffering, the Noble Eightfold Path. I've spoken of it many times in many videos. You can Google, look at Wikipedia's explanation of those two very important core teachings of the Buddha, which are the crux of Buddhism. The text is contained within the Sutta Pitaka. There is the Tipitaka, which is the three baskets. The Vinaya Pitaka, which is mainly about sila, moral virtue, and is mainly directed towards ordained individuals such as monks and nuns, bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. However, it is useful and interesting to get to understand, but most of it is contained within the suttas and the precepts that are necessary for lay Buddhists, which I'll come on to in a minute, to understand and take. But the Sutta Pitaka, the second of those three baskets, is the collection of the Buddha's teachings. That is our Bible, that is our Quran, that is our Torah, that is our holy book. It is quite cumbersome in the fact that the Buddha taught for 45 years, whereas the New Testament contains the teachings of Jesus. He only taught for 3 years. So as you can imagine, there are a lot more words. However, much like Jesus, the Buddha only taught very simply, but to very many different people. So there are very many different versions of the same teaching within that Sutta Pitaka. Therefore, it is a big book. But this is our book. This is where we start. And you can read those suttas from start to finish. And although they're all different, they're teaching what the Buddha said. I only teach one thing: suffering and the end of suffering, which is two things, but the emphasis being on the end of suffering makes it really that he's teaching how to be free from suffering in this lifetime. So we do have churches, temples, we have places to worship or practice, let's say, or pay homage to, give our respects to the what we can actually, by way of converting or becoming or taking refuge, we refer to it as, because that is what it is. Taking refuge in the Buddha, who is our teacher, the Dharma, his teachings, and the Sangha, whom are the lineage of monks and nuns that have continued since his time to practice in accordance with that first Pitaka, the Vinaya Pitaka, the very strict rules of those orders, to be able to teach lay people from the Sutta Pitaka how to go about becoming free from suffering in this lifetime. You may be thinking, well, what's the third book, being as it's T Pitaka, T is 3, it's the Abhidharma, which is a far more in-depth and complex study of those Buddha's teachings and the psychology behind that, and a study of the mental aspects as opposed to the physical aspects of the whole thought process, the whole step-by-step analysis of becoming free from suffering. However, it is a commentary added somewhat later and an interpretation of the very word of the Buddha. The actual word of the Buddha is contained in his teachings, which are very simple. I don't talk about the Abhidharma because although I have read it and to some extent studied it, found it to be rather of no consequence to the actual practice. It is an interesting study. It is that, a study, a way of employing your intellectual capability to get your understanding around the core teachings of the Buddha. But if you look at those quite in their simplest form, which is the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path, which really is just categorized as practicing, keeping sila, moral virtue, practicing meditation and developing wisdom by gaining right view, having right intention, right speech, right actions, right livelihood, employing right effort and mindfulness and meditation. This is what the Buddha taught. This is the core teachings of the Buddha and is contained in all of the Buddhist scriptures throughout in varying ways. When I was looking into Christianity, I was brought up in that environment, I found the best accompaniment to the Bible was the BCP, the Book of Common Prayer. Albeit it was prayers and forms of worship, it kind of summarized a lot of the teachings of Jesus contained in the New Testament in a handy form and easy way to remember. And similarly, I consider as our little more practical form of holy book, Bible, to be our chanting book. They come in various forms. You can Google, look up Buddhist chanting books. If you want my recommendation, the one I use is the Wat Mark Jan chanting book. You can Google that or ask me and I'll send you the link. And that actually contains summaries of the teachings of the Buddha, as well as reflections on the qualities of the Buddha, the qualities of the Dharma, and the qualities of the Sangha, for us to continually recall and use as part of our practice. The conversion process, there is no need. There is no baptism. However, people like the idea of being made a Buddhist, making a determination, we call in Pali adhitthana, okay? A resolution, a declaration. So often people will come to the temple on the Uposatha and they will, well, in fact, whenever they come to the temple, will have the opportunity to see a monk, a bhikkhu, someone who's fully ordained, like myself, and you can do what's called a short ceremony, which is taking refuge in the Triple Gem, where you take refuge, shelter, like shelter from the rain in this kuti here. You take shelter in the Buddha, our teacher, the Dharma, his teachings, and the Sangha, us monks and nuns who are here to help you, teach you the Dharma, and show you the way towards freedom from suffering in this lifetime. By taking refuge, it's a simple ceremony. You repeat after the bhikkhu, Buddhang saranang gacchami, which means I take refuge in the Buddha, and then Dhammam and Sangham, and the Dharma and the Sangha. You do this 3 times, repeating it and reaffirming it in your mind as you're putting your confidence in the teachings of the Buddha as being the way towards that freedom from suffering. You also, at that time, will take 5 precepts, reaffirming that you will refrain from killing, from stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, or taking of intoxicants. And on those holy days, you can extend that to refraining from any sexual activity whatsoever, and then adding on to it not eating in the afternoon, and refraining from entertainment, beautification, and also refraining from lazing around on high and comfortable furniture, but just to sit on simple mats on the floor and practice meditation throughout that holy day. This is possible. You can do this alone if you get the chanting book that I recommended at home, or with someone else who's interested in Buddhism also. You can also go online, find resources there where this is available to you. If necessary, and you have a few people, and that isn't the case, you can't find anything, if enough people contact me and we can get a common time, because of course we're all in different parts of the world, but maybe a couple of common times, then I will very happily put together some way that we can get together live and online where you can take refuge in the Triple Gem and reaffirm your precepts, 5 precepts. It would need to be just the 5 precepts, because the 8 precepts are rather time dependent with the not eating in the afternoon thing, and if you're doing it for just one day when you visit the temple, the only place for lay people to take 8 precepts is in that environment. Otherwise you can live on 8 precepts, but you don't need to go anywhere to reaffirm those. You can just do that for yourself at home. Say, well, I won't eat in the afternoon, and I won't ever now indulge in entertainment, and I'll sleep on the floor rather than a high and luxurious comfortable bed. That's all you need to do. So there are those ceremonies, and they are available. If you, the person who commented is obviously seeing these videos online. I don't follow a very structured, as someone's commented quite vigorously just recently, format in these talks. I ramble. That's the point. I don't want them to be formal. I don't want them to be, I'm not even dressed formally, you see. There's practical reasons, because I've just finished my meal. I've been on they're still on holiday, so there's no one to give me any lifts, it seems. So I'm still walking the full distance, which is, I worked out to be the shortest I can do it is 7.2 kilometers there and back in the rain. So my robes are wet and hanging on the line, my inside line, which is just the rail in my bathroom, washroom. And I'm relatively dry now from the fan inside, having sat and eaten. And I have a warm cat who's also keeping out of the rain, taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma and the Sangha, and seemingly benefiting greatly from doing so. I hope that helps point you in the right direction, but if I can be of any more help in that respect, please email me directly. Anyone can do that. There will come a time when it won't be possible to answer all of your comments on here, on this channel, unless suddenly it stops growing, which will be useful because this is very manageable at the moment, but that's not likely to be the case. These things tend to have a momentum, but there will come a time when the best form of contact for me to deal with your inquiries directly and pertinently and personally will be by means of email. But also those will be useful to provide content for these continued questions and answers, which I will continue to do for as long as I possibly can. So, Excuse me, I have to skip that one because frankly I'd have to look something up because I don't quite know the answer. I know my answer, but I don't quite understand the question. Now this is a really good question. It sounds a bit silly. And actually I asked this question and was told it was a silly question, which I was a little bit hurt by at the time. And I've never really got to the bottom of it. I only had to work out my own answer. We are taught when we're ordained, I'll explain the background, to reflect on 5 things. So these are hair of the body, hair of the head, nails, teeth and skin. And we repeat that in the Pali language as a little mantra, because these are the visible parts of the body which we reflect upon, as I spoke about in a recent video. So I won't go into the details behind the Subha practice and that practice. And quite rightly, this subscriber has identified that we don't include within that eyes. He says eyeballs, but eyes. And I said to one of my teachers, and I can't remember exactly the occasion or which teacher, but I think he was very busy and there were lots of questions, and they were questions of an intellectual nature. And my very basic question was, why do we not include eyes and make it 6 things? Because after all, we can see hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth and skin. But what can we see mostly and we're most drawn to, our attention, is always eyes, isn't it? So I have always wondered this. Why are eyes not included in those 5 matters for continual reflection? Now, one has to come to the 32 parts of the body and look at the original 32 parts of the body. I think there were 31 because the brain was not included, and I think it gets included later. It might be the other way around, but no, it gets included later. So it might be 33 is what I'm saying if it's included, but in the original 32 parts of the body, brain is not included. And I'm not sure, are they, eyes specifically are not included either. So I think this goes back to some ancient Indian philosophy about the eyes, the third eye, the brain, and something that we don't really need to understand, but can just leave it out. But I appreciate your question because it's the only time I've ever heard that question, other than for myself, asked in any circumstances. And we can consider, there is a sutta, there is a very good sutta which refers directly to it, and I rarely quote from suttas, but on this occasion I will. There is this beautiful, beautiful princessy kind of woman. She could have been a concubine or anything. I don't know what the full sutta, the story behind it, but I remember it because of the eyes question. And anyway, she's being pursued by a rampant man, a being, wanting to have his wicked way with this very beautiful woman. He's declaring his undying love for this beautiful woman and wanting his way. How do we put this? And she stops, as we are often taught and try to practice in varying circumstances. It's best to just let's stop. And she plucked out her eye. He'd declared all sorts of things. You're so beautiful, your beautiful hair, your beautiful skin, your beautiful eyes, your beautiful teeth, your everything, the way you walk, the way you sound, the way you sing. It's all beautiful. So she pulls her eye out like this, puts it in the palm of her hand and offers it to the man and says, now what do you think of this? And he's repulsed by the sight that he's seen, and his ardour is dampened and lust has gone away. And this is a good example of something we see, as in addition to the other 5 things we can see, but in essence taken away from the body, like when you cut off the hair or the fingernails, or in this case take out the eye, or indeed if someone was to at night time take their teeth out and put them in a glass of water by the side of the bed, they're no longer beautiful gleaming white teeth. They're a set of rather ugly looking dentures in a glass of Steradent or such. So this is the point. So the answer to your question is no, they're not part of the classification. You don't ask why, and I don't know the answer why. I can only guess. Also, in meditation, our eyes are closed, but, you know, so is the mouth. And teeth are included, aren't they? But if anybody's got anyone wants to make any comments or got any background as to why eyes aren't included, I'd like to know also. Thank you for that question. So, sorry to go silent on you, but I was reading the whole background. Generally speaking, this is coming up quite a few questions about finding, well, specifically Theravada Buddhist temples where you live. There are various Google resources if you Google in your area. But yeah, they are rather lacking. It's not like if you Google electrician or plumber or bricklayer, you'll get a whole list of them. There used to be a Theravada Buddhist temple directory, but these have become very out of date. It's really about word of mouth and these kinds of forums and building up friendships with other people. And as happens sometimes with these comments on here, other people might send a comment in reply. I never go further than the first level of the comment, but they may be able to point you in the right direction. Finding temples, monasteries is quite difficult because they will be of varying traditions. But if you remember, they are still going to be wholesome, calm, quiet, generally speaking, places where you can go and practice and possibly even go and take precepts and take refuge and almost certainly go and offer dana. So they're places where you can do that. If you're in places where there are no temples, no such places, then you do have these online resources for your group get-togethers. But as far as your practice is concerned, you can do this anywhere. You can practice in solitude wherever you are. At home, just make a little exclusive area separate from, however small your living space. I lived in a very small van for 3 years, but still had its own dedicated place for my Buddha Rupa, for my place for my little bit of reflection, chanting, my meditation, separate from where I was doing my cooking or maybe sitting and reading or whatever else during the day. Even in a very small space that I had, you create that little separate corner. You know, some places they're very particular that it has to face the correct direction, like here. But you know, this isn't, as long as you've got a dedicated area away from your other arbitrary ablutions, then you can keep that sacred. This practice is very much a practice of solitude anyway, but I do appreciate one needs to, as in the comment I was reading, when you become a little bit disenchanted, as you start to attain the quality of nibbida, disenchantment with what you used to find very enjoyable, so going out, socializing, maybe going to clubs or pubs or singing and dancing, entertainment, drinking, going to restaurants, or even the holidays you used to take. as these become less appealing to you, you become disenchanted. This is what we call nibbida, which is actually the goal, to find contentment in far less, in more simple ways. But it's still very important to have kalyana mita, noble friendships. It means really beautiful friends, but it's implying friends that are following the Noble Eightfold Path also. This can be built up these days, I think, more easily than any other way by this kind of format, this online. Now, I'm sure I don't have any social media like Facebook and things, but I'm sure on such social media forums there are groups, specifically probably Theravada Buddhist groups on all of these popular social media places. Like in YouTube, there's these Buddhist channels, admittedly quite hard to find. You have to search specifically often what you're looking for, and then you have to filter what isn't appropriate to you, or what isn't what appeals to your way of practice, and eventually you get it down to just a few. And I suggest you don't have too many in your collection, you have just a few. I have a few Dharma channels I listen to regularly, but they are a very few, not many at all. And that is organic. It changes as I develop with my practice, and also as the teachings and teachers change on those channels. Maybe I also find that I've changed and will change. There's nothing wrong. You can keep moving around in that sense as you develop. But this is where we find collective support, kalyana mita. And also you can make your own groups if you're in a non-Buddhist area. There used to be a group when I first was interested in Buddhism in my own country. It's very well known, the Buddhist Society in England, but then it had local branches, and I joined a branch of that, the Buddhist Society, and found it was, to begin with, a very useful place to go and meet other like-minded people following the Noble Eightfold Path. But like all of these groups, they can sometimes evolve into more places of debate, and then develop their own little structures of hierarchy. They can become a business of themselves rather than a business of Buddhism. They can become more about the group and its activities than what you're all there to discuss. So we pay close attention to this, and we follow the Noble Eightfold Path with our intention and our inclinations towards these groups as to what they're giving back to us and what we can give to them. So we keep it under continuous review, but we stay committed, we remain committed and supportive of mutually supportive structures and groups that are available to us in whichever area where we exist. As far as holidays are concerned, that's quite easy. You can change your holiday destinations from, say, the Costa del Sol or Ibiza to, say, a Buddhist country. But be careful, you could go to Thailand and find versions of Ibiza and the Costa del Sol in exaggerated form, or you can find Arahant Buddhist monks. You have to use diligence when you get there and go to the right places. And that's the same, I think, for most Buddhist countries. So you have visited monasteries in England. And the Theravada Buddhist monasteries in England that I know of, well, they're of the Ajahn Chah tradition, the Thai Forest tradition. If you've had the opportunity to visit those, I can't think of any better places in the world where you can go outside of some very perhaps difficult to get to and unheard of forest monasteries in some Buddhist countries. And of course in America it's the Thai Forest tradition of Ajahn Chah extends to America, Canada, and you can go to forestsangha.org to find all the worldwide, those group of monasteries. So if you've been to those, you already have those on your, not doorstep maybe, but accessible to you. So I'm not sure what more advice I can give you in respect of that. Okay, so next one. Om Mani Padme Hum. So this is from a different tradition, but very nice. I like to hear these things sometimes. I did start my original Buddhist practice saying Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum a lot of times with a mala, before I found that it wasn't really for me that necessary. But there we go. I don't know how to control my emotions. Even though I do practice mindfulness meditation, emotions always get me. The suffering, anger, hate, greed always wins. Kindly teach some ways to control these emotions, selfish feelings, and how to not judge whatever I come across. That is what this channel is entirely about. Exactly that. We're fighting the kilesas, which are the defilements of greed, you even quote them, hatred and delusion. That is what I'm talking about. And the way we do that is we practice the Noble Eightfold Path. Right intention, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, and concentration. We practice Sila, Samadhi, Panya. I've already spoken of that already once in this video, and each video I always refer back to our practice, which is just that, the practice of Sila, Samadhi, Panya. It takes time. These emotions will not go away overnight, and you cannot control your emotions any more than you can control your heartbeat. To some extent, of course, if you sit and spend some time to allow your body to settle, it will relax and your heartbeat will very gradually slow down, as will your rate of respiration. In turn also, your mind will also, but this is more difficult, have time to settle, become calm, become tranquil, and thoughts will eventually become fewer, but cease, maybe not for a very long time. Emotions, which often correspond with physical feelings also, are very hard to tackle because it's two things at the same time. It's body and mind, nama and rupa. That's actually mind and body, so it's the other way around, but we usually say nama and rupa. It's trying to rein in, embrace and control what is the uncontrollable. But what you can do is train, guide nama and rupa by replacing the thoughts that create unsatisfactory emotions or uncomfortable emotions are created as a result of thoughts that are unskillful or unwholesome. If you replace those thoughts with skillful or wholesome thoughts, for instance that of metta, loving kindness, karuna, compassion, mudita, joy for others, you will develop some upekkha, which is equanimity. And these are the four Brahma Viharas, the heavenly abodes. These are qualities, not places. They're not gods, they're not heavens and certainly not hells, but they're described as heavenly abodes because they are in fact that God within you, that God-like deity personified within you. Those qualities you've always had, you don't convert to or become, you expose them by replacing the unwholesome thoughts with wholesome thoughts, and therefore slowly making less room for and moving out the uncomfortable emotions that naturally arise and will continue to try and creep back in, but slowly, gradually along this Noble Eightfold Path you will eventually be free from those. And this comes with what I just described, nibbida at first, this disenchantment with those forms of sensual activities that used to give us satisfaction and we find are not, they're just fueling insatiable desire, and give us a whole new basis of contentment, which creates a whole more sustainable form of happiness, until eventually all of those unwholesome thoughts and eventually those emotions do become, to some extent, not controlled, but under an element of controlled, and you make no more room for them. You have no accommodation. There is no more room at the inn for this bad feeling. Only happiness coming from contentment. But it has to be an unconditioned contentment that only comes from sila, keeping moral virtue, samadhi, meditation, and the development of wisdom, that of wholesome mind states and the reduction of unwholesome mind states. That is the Noble Eightfold Path, and that is the way to become free from suffering in this lifetime. So I think on that note I should leave it there and hope there is something of use you can pick from this ramble of unstructured talking from me. Use it, and if not, just let it go. There are other channels out there. You don't need to write a big long critique. I've only received one, but they get in there, don't they? So enjoy or look elsewhere, but I hope it's useful, and if so, please come back and watch again. In the meantime, be happy and stay well. Sukhi Hotu. Now I've got to disturb this this cat, my borrowed cat. There we go. Yes, we can now continue with our meditation, but I have to I'm going to turn the camera off. Okay, good girl.